And on this National Purple Heart Day, it's also time for Joe Steckler and Helping Seniors of Brevard here on 90.3 FM. Our time is 12:05, and now here's your host of the show on National Purple Heart Day, Joe Steckler. Hi, Joe.
Hi, thank you, John, and welcome to our listeners for today's edition of Helping Seniors. I'd just like to remind everybody that Helping Seniors is a program designed to inform, educate, and help seniors and those that care for seniors. And we have a whole host of sponsors that help us meet our financial responsibilities in keeping this program on the air. And if you go to our website, helpingseniorsofbrevard.org, and you will, if you take a look at the list of sponsors, you'll see that all those sponsors are people or organizations that are just, their primary mission is to help seniors in some way. And that's what's important for people to understand. And if you call our education specialist, Kim Bernard, at 321-473-7770 at our new offices on Beachside, Kim can help you get connected with someone that can help you. And if we don't have a ready answer, we'll do the research and we'll find a way to get you connected to somebody if at all possible. You know, some of those sponsors include organizations like Dr. Lee Sheldon, who is a periodontist, and he's been with us from the very, very beginning. Our panelist today, Bill Johnson, has been with me on the air for close to 20 years. That's a long time. It's from the very beginning. And then we have other organizations like Zon Beachside, where we have our new office. And in that office is 4 or 5 other organizations that help seniors. And it's called the Senior Resource Center. And the owner of Zon Beachside recognized the need for us to have something that supplements one senior place, because our people are designed specifically to help seniors. And we're getting ready to put a new series of seminars on the air. And Kerry Fink, our media guy, is with us today. And at some point in the show today, I'll ask Kerry to talk a little bit about this new program we're going to offer, because Bill Johnson will be a very big part of it. But today, we're going to talk about the guardianship case going on over in Orlando, because the things that Bill is going to talk about today are things that just keep popping up. And we've talked about this for close to 20 years at some point in the building of our organization. And for some reason, we just don't seem to get the problem solved with do not resuscitate forms and following the law and making good decisions. So if you want to ask Bill a question today, you can call us at 321-722-9998. So if you have a question, give us a call. And if you are reluctant to call us on the air, you can call us at the number I gave you before, 473-7770. So with that, welcome, Bill, and welcome, Kerry. Welcome, Bill.
Hi, Joe.
Kerry?
Yeah, thanks, and good afternoon.
Oh, I'm glad you said it is good afternoon. It's not morning. I feel a lot better knowing we got past the morning.
Right.
Bill, you know, you're an elder law attorney, and you carry a lot of designations, and I've worked with you over the years, and I've asked you so many questions, and I've always gotten good answers, and I feel good about that. And I trust what you tell me, because I've never found the advice that you've given me to be contrary to what was really needed to be said. And you're not afraid to say what needs to be said. And then, you know, I don't have anything against attorneys, but there are a lot of attorneys that just simply don't or won't play by the rule book, and it's a tough thing. But let's just get the show started this morning, and you can talk a little bit about this guardianship case going on over there in Orlando, because I think it's important for our listeners to understand more about it, Bill.
Okay, so the guardianship case that's going on in Orlando involves a professional guardian who allegedly signed a do not resuscitate order for a ward of hers, a gentleman. He was on in his years. He had some reoccurring medical problems and had been in and out of medical facilities over the last few months. The facts I'm giving you are as reported by the Orlando Sentinel. I am not involved in this case personally in any way, shape, or form. So it appears that at some point the hospital disagreed with whether or not this gentleman should have a do not resuscitate. They convened an ethics committee at the hospital. The professional guardian decided that she was going to still execute the do not resuscitate order. It is interesting to note that a guardian alone can't execute a do not resuscitate order. A physician must also sign it, which the press does not ever pick up on that little fact. And the gentleman had to have, I guess he had esophageal problems, and he had to have a feeding tube. And the guardian ordered the feeding tube capped. And then they were trying to feed him by mouth. He aspirated and died. And they couldn't revive him because of the do not resuscitate order that was in place. Now, the question is, or should be on most people's minds, where is his family? Well, due to legal problems that this gentleman had in the past, he was alienated from his children, and he had a friend here in Brevard County acting as his, I believe, power attorney and healthcare surrogate. The reason she was no longer involved was, from what I understand, that he had been admitted to the hospital. The hospital could not find her anywhere. It turned out she was on vacation, I think overseas, and they had to get somebody in to be a decision maker pronto. So they contacted a professional guardian. This gentleman was then, because of his past legal history, he was not able to go to any facilities in Brevard. At least that's what the guardian, I guess, reported to the Office of Professional and Public Guardianship. I think that's in their report. So she ended up having to move him to a facility over by the Tampa Bay area, somewhere in that neck of the woods. So the family, the daughter, who, from what I understand, hadn't had any contact in quite a while, and this friend reemerged and tell a different story, I guess is the case here. The story they tell is that he did not want to have a do not resuscitate order, that they never believed that he wanted such a thing. There is some inkling that he may have said that to a healthcare provider. I can't discern that necessarily. He did have, obviously, you don't get a guardianship if you're mentally fine. You have to be incapacitated. So what he said to any given person on any given day could be a matter of whoever was talking to him. So the first, and of course, now that the friend and the daughter have ended up in the press, and they had filed a complaint with the Office of Professional and Public Guardianship, which did an investigation, and they have taken action or filed a report against the professional guardian. A judge in Orlando removed her from over 100 different guardianship cases.
Wow.
Based on that report. And the judge in her order, amongst other things, said that one of the reasons she was removing her is because she had signed a do not resuscitate order without a court order or the family's consent. There were some other, what we would call technical violations, failing to account here or there for something, but nothing else that was considerably as major as that. The press picked it up, and the daughter and the friend have been all over the newspaper talking about the case. The Office of Professional and Public Guardianship, once they conclude their investigation, their report was made public, and the press grabbed that and put that out there. So the first major issue with the case, or first observation, I would say, is we've never heard from the Guardian. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that. Florida Statute 744 says that your ward will have privacy. That's a right that they retain, the right to privacy. So guardians, any stripe of guardian, not just professionals, cannot go around talking about a guardianship case due to the ward's right of privacy. Well, that law extends to everybody else. So, the daughter and the friend talking about this seems to be a violation of the privacy rights of the ward. It also, the press picked up what his criminal conviction was for, and that got all over the press. And by the way, folks, this story went nationally. It was covered nationally. So we've only heard, one side of the story from everybody who was kind of involved in the case, yet none of them respected the privacy rights of 744, and we haven't heard anything from the Guardian. So that's kind of the factual background in the case. Currently, what's happening as of a few days ago, let's talk a couple weeks ago, the governor came out and said he's going to launch an investigation into the case, and he's going to propose legislation to change the guardianship rules. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE, initiated its own investigation to see if there was criminal wrongdoing. And as a couple days ago, they just raided her offices.
Wow.
Judges in several other jurisdictions have removed her from being a professional guardian on their cases. And as you can imagine, we're probably not going to hear anything from her, especially if you have a criminal or potentially a criminal charge hanging over your head. Again, so we only get one side of the whole story. We never get to hear her side, which is one of the observations, I think, if you're accused of something, or at least in a guardianship, there certainly should be an opportunity for you to defend yourself in the press, because the case has been tried in the press. She's been found convicted in the press. The press has misspoken on a number of different things. And I'm not saying that what she did was correct. I certainly wouldn't recommend somebody sign a professional guardian sign a do not resuscitate order, especially if the ethics committee at the hospital didn't seem to think that was the route to go. But I went ahead and looked it all up. Mm-hmm. And basically, the law says resuscitation may be withheld or withdrawn from a patient by an emergency medical technician or paramedic if evidence of an order not to resuscitate by the patient's physician is presented to the emergency medical technician or paramedic. An order not to resuscitate, to be valid, must be on the form adopted by the rule of the department. The form must be signed by the patient's physician and by the patient, or if the patient is incapacitated, the patient's healthcare surrogate or proxy as provided in Chapter 765, court-appointed guardian as provided in Chapter 744, or attorney in fact under a durable power of attorney as provided in Chapter 709. The court-appointed guardian or attorney in fact must have been delegated authority to make health care decisions on behalf of the patient. So certainly when you read that, if she was a guardian and and it appears she was delegated health care decision-making authority on behalf of the patient, it certainly seems that she didn't need a court order to sign a do not resuscitate order. So it calls into question what the judge was ruling on in that particular fact, because it's long been the belief, at least in the professional guardian community, that you don't need a court order to sign a do not resuscitate order.
Let me ask just a layman's question now, because I certainly am not an attorney, but I have listened to you talk over the years, and I've done a lot of research on all this. The first question that comes to my mind, Bill, is whether or not a guardian that has 100 cases can monitor 100 cases.
That's a great question, because that was just 100 cases in Orange County. I think her total caseload exceeded 200.
Wow.
So,
okay, but
here's where you're getting kind of off the grid. Is you're assuming she's a one-man show, which most professional guardians are not. With a caseload like that, she has a staff. She had an office. She has, I know a professional guardian with over 200 cases that has a staff of like 12 people.
Okay.
Okay, so it's not just the law, by the way, only provides that a professional guardian must visit the ward at least once a quarter, 4 times a year.
Okay, I remember
physically visit.
Another question that comes to my mind is that we talk about the do not resuscitate forms and having the person involved, if they're of sound mind, that they have to sign it. The more and more I think about it in my own situation with the medical problems I've had, I don't know if all the doctors and the surgeons that have operated on me have had to even think about a do not resuscitate form, but I'm thinking that you might have a situation come up that if a person's not in good health, but they're still hanging in there, and something happens, like in this case, or if a person was choking on something or had a problem like that, and they wouldn't let them help the person because of a not resuscitate form. My fear is in signing one of those forms is that something simple might come up, but they make a judgment call and invoke the do not resuscitate form.
You are correct. It is a kind of final thing. If you have one of these and they come to, use the paddles on you and bring you back to life, and you have one of these forms, they're going to stop dead in their tracks. So there is a finality to it. Now, I've heard from people at independent living facilities or assisted living facilities, where somebody has a heart attack and they're 95 years old, and they've been in a room for 10 minutes before somebody noticed, and they have to call 911, and to watch them come in with the paddles and try to bring somebody back to life is in that situation is quite traumatizing on everybody around, let alone if you brought them back to life, they'd probably be in a coma for the rest of their life because they'd be brain dead. So there is a flip side argument for allowing people to do these.
And then you think about the person that you've designated as your legal person that can make that decision. If you can't make it, think of the terrible responsibility placed on that person as to whether or not they should invoke the do not resuscitate.
Correct. And obviously it has to be signed by them and a physician. So there has to be a consult with a physician who signs it. And it's interesting to note, but under this statute later on, you can't hold the physician responsible for anything. You can only hold the person who signed it responsible for any wrongdoing. Physicians have immunity when they sign these.
Wow.
So, but the press, the Orlando Sentinel, never picked up on the fact that a doctor signed this do not resuscitate order for this individual who passed away. So there was a physician involved in this process.
So what
and I've seen it. I've seen an image of it. If you look at their story, the Sentinel story, it cuts off right above where the physician's signature is. But if you go to some other news sources, they have a fuller image where you can actually see the doctor who signed the form.
But from what you're saying, Bill, is it seems that the people involved, the guardian and everything else, have dotted the I's and crossed the T's in all aspects of this, and it seems like it's another situation where we have with the press.
Well, hold on. It gets better because there are other laws that come into play on this. If you are a professional guardian, there are a set of standards that you have to follow that have been established by the Office of Professional and Public Guardianship. Those standards require that when you make, some intervention, which I'm certainly sure this would count as a intervention affecting somebody's health, you are supposed to consult with the friends and family of the individual on these decisions and find out whether or not this is something this person would have wanted, things like that. Now, from what I'm reading, I don't see where maybe this guardian did that.
Oh.
So perhaps the DNR is fine, but the process whereby she came to the decision to do the DNR might be a problematic. But again, we haven't heard from her, so I'm not necessarily going to throw her under the bus. If she had talked to the patient and the patient said, yes, they want that, that might be a little more controlling.
Okay. All right. Hold that thought there. And Kerry, we are going to let Kerry talk on the next part of the show. So if he's sitting here nodding to everything that Bill is saying, and he's agreeing, and since it's just radio, we'll have to convey to you what we see here through our own screen watching people. But stay with us because we got some other things that are really going to be important to you that you need to think about on the next part of the show. Stay with us.
12:34 in the afternoon here on 90.3 FM and on this National Purple Heart Day. Right now, since it's Wednesday, it's Joe Steckler Day, helping seniors of Brevard. And here again is your host, Joe Steckler. Joe?
Thank you, John. And even before I go one step further, you mentioned Purple Heart Day. I wasn't aware that was about today, but Jim, you got a Purple Heart on the back of your car. And what does Purple Heart Day mean to you,
Well, actually, it's kind of an acknowledgement. I remember years and years ago, people didn't really pay much attention to Purple Hearts. It seemed like so many people were getting them for so many different reasons. But really, the Purple Heart significance, the significance is to memorialize the combat wounded. And we've had a lot of people, during World War II, there were a lot of guys who got Purple Hearts. They really didn't care much about them. But, you really do when you really stop and think about it. It's not for a paper cut. It's not something you get for running a filing cabinet, jamming your thumb in a drawer. You get it because you're basically been shot, blown up, or something of that nature. And, what does it mean? Well, I know from this standpoint, Vietnam vets have a tendency to sit there and say, well, I used to not care about this stuff, but I do now. And I really do care about it now because actually what it means is that, no, I wasn't absolutely wrong. I was angry as a vet when I came back. We never got the proper thank you. I was very angry about that. And all I can tell you is that now, I get a parking place at Sam's. I'll be serious. That means a lot to me. And, the Purple Heart is something that it's a way to kind of say, look, thanks. We understand. We know what you're going through, what you went through. And, it's a small thing, but it's an important thing to just about anybody, at least from my generation, going back, maybe 50 years. And, it's just something you have to live with and you have to deal with. And it's one way to pat yourself on the head, I guess, because you never got a thank you.
I understand what you're saying. And I think, from my own viewpoint, 38 years of service, I was in submarines and I never had a bullet. Well, I can't say that. I'm going to say I never had a bullet shot at me, but I think there were some other things during my time in the service in the Tonkin Gulf, and so I really still can't talk about it. But, it does make you think, and especially from my time in service on a submarine, if things go haywire, you can lose a crew of 85 men, and well, now they got women on them now, but thankfully in my day it was just men. And I'm not going to go further into that situation, but I think that we're going to find a lot of things changing, just like what we're talking about on the show today. But I still have one thing that I want to ask Bill about, because there's a Florida statute 825 that it's and by the way, thank you, Jim, and thank you for the service, and
Yes,
you earned
thank you.
you earned that license plate you got, so I know that. Oh, thank you. What is Florida Statute 825, Bill? What is it? How does it?
Well, the reason I brought that up as a talking point for today is the last Orlando Sentinel article was talking about the possible grounds that they could go after this particular guardian for criminal prosecution. And 825 is the elder abuse, exploitation, and neglect statute, the criminal one. And it has some definitions that are very interesting in this context. First of all, when we talk about somebody being a caregiver means a person who has been entrusted with or has assumed the responsibility of care for or the property of an elderly person or disabled adult. Caregiver includes, but is not limited to, relatives, court-appointed or voluntary guardians, adult household members, neighbors, healthcare providers, and employees and volunteers of facilities as defined in subsection 7, which would be your long-term care facilities. So, what does that mean here? Well, section 3A of 825 says a caregiver's failure or omission to provide an elderly person or disabled adult with the care, supervision, and services necessary to maintain the elderly person or disabled adult's physical and mental health, including but not limited to food, nutrition, clothing, shelter, supervision, medicine, and medical services that a person would consider essential for the well-being of the elderly person or disabled adult. Well, if you sign a DNR, aren't you stopping medical services that would help the well-being of the adult? And it also says caregiver's failure to make a reasonable effort to protect an elderly person or disabled adult from abuse, neglect, or exploitation by another person. It further says neglect of an elderly person or disabled adult may be based on repeated conduct or on a single incident or omission that results in or could reasonably be expected to result in serious physical or psychological injury or a substantial risk of death to an elderly person or disabled adult. So in this particular case, the DNR, they're saying, is what created which would be an incident that results in death.
So arguably one of the laws or one of the statutes is sort of in direct, at least confusion with the one that you read us earlier about the ability of a guardian to
sign a DNR.
Exactly.
Which then, in my read of this is if anyone other than the individual signs a DNR, you could potentially be accused of violating 825.
Wow.
Because it says neighbors, friends, relatives, guardians, healthcare surrogates.
That goes back to the thing. We've done so many shows in the past that talked about if you're going to get a guardian, you should do that while you're of sound mind, so that you get somebody to be a guardian that you trust, that you feel that would do what you want them to do, and that's sometimes you have to make that decision very early on.
Well, if we backtrack in this case, remember that when we broke, we were talking about the guardianship rules. It says you have to confer with the individual, confer with the family, and when making a medical judgment or medical intervention. What if, in this particular case, because of this person's criminal background, the family was totally alienated? Mm-hmm. They weren't around to consult with about a medical decision like this. So, how far and by family, how far do we have to go?
Right.
I mean, is it enough that I talk to the son? But what about the brothers and sisters? What if they object? How many of the family do I have to talk to? When you say family, I mean, we've had guardianship cases where we've had to start them, and we don't even know if there's family because the person is incapacitated and can't even tell us if they have a son or a daughter or anything. Right. And then all of a sudden, a sister shows up who hasn't visited in 10 years and involves herself in the guardianship. And we're like, well, we didn't know about you. Well,
it makes it very tough for the guardians then to know how to, even if when they're wanting to do this 100% correctly, it's a little bit gray for them, isn't it?
Correct. And in fact, in the notice, I have to give notice of basically an interested person is anybody who would be impacted by the outcome of the litigation. Mm-hmm. So I have to give notice to those persons, and in certain circumstances, it would be deemed, if your parents are dead and your spouse is deceased, it would be your children. So in one case I just recently had, we noticed the son. The son was okay with the professional coming in. He had his whole own issues and all this. And then all of a sudden, the sister pops up and said, nobody contacted her about this. And
wow.
And my response was, I don't have to. You're not the lineal heir. Mm-hmm. We had the consent of the lineal heir.
I'll sort of support that because many years ago, my last job as a Navy, I come in a Navy retirement home, and I had a lot of legal responsibilities there, and I had one case where a man passed away, and family members came in and tried to contest his will. And I had to appear before the judge, and the judge asked me a couple of questions, and the son was there, and the attorney got the son to talk, and the son was saying, well, he was trying, there was some money involved, and the son was trying to contest it, and the judge looked at me and he said, I read this, that understand that the father signed this when he was of sound mind, and he did everything, followed the rules and everything else. And I said, that's what it looks like to me, Judge. And the judge said to the son, he said, it looks the same way to me. And he said, it stands just as the father had it, and there'll be no more to talk about where the money goes or what happens. He said, you were estranged from your father, and it was very clear. And that was it. That was the judge just. It didn't take long for the judge to make that ruling, but the judge was able to do that, Bill, because it was very clearly laid out the way the father wanted it, and he did it the right way.
Well, that brings up a great point about this case, is that this is being played out in the press.
Right.
So when you go in front of a judge who has one of these cases, what do you think they're going to do? They're probably going to err on the side of caution, because just like everybody else, they don't want to be the one whose name gets dragged through the mud if somebody passes away. I mean, they're going to err on the side of caution, and again, that's, I think the biggest point I was trying to make about this whole case is there are a lot of unintended consequences that are going to result from the actions taken by a lot of these entities, FDLE, the governor, the judges, the Office of Professional and Public Guardianship, and including now all the guardians who are out there trying to cover their own tails. And that is just snowballing through the system right now.
Sure.
Because nobody, not one of those entities I talked about, wants to see their name in the headlights.
Right.
So
this gives us a chance for Kerry to finally make a grand entry into the show this morning, because Gary, I'd like for you to talk just a couple of minutes here about the Senior Resource Center over at Zahn, and what the owner of Zahn Beachside wants to do with the seminars and things. And in fact, that Bill will probably be one of the first ones we ask to appear in our seminars over there. And it looks like you're going to say something.
I was just going to say, we are the Florida State Guardianship Association Space Coast chapter will be having our meetings over there starting in October.
Great.
So we'll be dropping by.
Well, one of the things that this whole conversation we've been having this hour really brings back as kind of the takeaway, aside from this being a very interesting story to follow for a lot of different reasons, and for all the points and aspects of this that you've brought out, it's going to be interesting to see where this winds up. But also, it really is an endorsement for the idea of getting your own aging plan together, so that everything that you want is buttoned up and organized in the way that you would want it. The very story, Joe, that you told about the case where you were called in to follow up on a resident there at the Naval Retirement Home, the reason that it prevailed was because everything was organized and buttoned up. And by the time you confirmed it, the judge saw that, and it was done. Which, doesn't that really speak to the reason you need to get all these things organized and thought about now, today?
I would totally agree with that. However, the need for a professional guardian usually happens because people don't do that.
Right.
Or they don't have any family.
Right.
And so subsequently they can't put certain decision makers in place. I've had quite a few people who don't have family, and I say, well, go interview the case managers and financial people who could pay your bills if something happens to you, and get those people on board, so if something happens to you, it's already in place, because otherwise you're going to get stuck with somebody you may not even know.
Right. And so that's the point of actually what Joe and we are working together with our friends at the Senior Resource Center of Brevard, which is we call it the Lighthouse Edition, because if you drive up South Patrick Drive going north, you see it. It's like the shape of a lighthouse. And the upstairs they have a chapel, and the downstairs they have a beautiful ballroom, and it's where you guys are going to be meeting when you have the Space Coast chapter of Florida Guardians. But one of the things that we're excited about from the Helping Seniors standpoint is that we're working together to spearhead this effort where there's going to be a twice a month community seminar series. And what's going to happen is it's the second, I'll give you a minute to grab a pencil so you can jot this down, and you can always get information, by the way, about this at helpingseniorsofbrevard.org, helpingseniorsofbrevard.org, or on our Facebook page, which is also Helping Seniors of Brevard. But the second Wednesday and the fourth Thursday of each month at 10 o'clock in the morning will be a 1-hour session. And it is really, each session will be a different topic and covering everything from things like how to make sure that you have the kind of paperwork needed that will protect you in the event that you are going to a hospital or you're in a situation where you can't speak for yourself, things like that. There'll be sessions on downsizing if you're planning on changing how you're living. You know the kids are gone. You're trying to figure out what's the right move for yourself now. There's going to be talks about that. We're going to talk about the services from the Helping Senior side. We're going to talk about the services and connections. And all this is happening on the second Wednesday, fourth Thursday of the month at 10 o'clock in the morning for 1 hour. And then even the kind folks at Zon, if everybody RSVPs who's coming 1 week before, 1 week in advance, they're actually going to treat them to lunch. So not only is it a great informational opportunity, but I think over time this is going to really become a community resource that is going to help people get information so they don't get into these kind of situations where it's just as the circumstances would dictate, but they actually have a chance to speak over those.
Well, one of the first things, you get too anxious, Bill. You always want to get into that mic. Other people want to talk too.
I've got a lot to say.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
I was going to say the sweetest sound to a lawyer is their own voice.
That goes for radio guys too. Just by the way.
Okay. I was going to point out that on the Helping Seniors of Brevard website, you can also get the audio of this show, as well as videos of presentations that have been done in the past, and there's a lot of really good information on there.
That's right.
Well, it's important that people understand that there is a place to go, and what I'm hoping is that we can get you teamed up in one of the seminars with a guy named August Felton. You know August?
I do not.
Okay. August is a financial planner, and he does financial planning from a little different aspect of what a stockbroker might do. But knowing what Gus does and what you do, Bill, with estate planning and all these things that where you have to get everything in place, it's never really too late to consider what your financial planning document should be. And a lot of people make a mistake because there are ways even later in life that you can start investments and protect what you do have. And this is where a lot of senior citizens really don't understand. And they think that once you mention stockbroker or retirement planning or something like that, they think it's somebody who's out to get their money, and a lot of times it's simply there to protect it. And good attorneys and good financial planning people have every right to make money off of a client that they're protecting and making things work better for them. And that's always been our objective at Helping Seniors, is to get good sponsors and get people on this radio show that can help us do planning for the future. And that's, you mentioned that, Kerry, when we talked about making the Resource Center be a part of the advocacy planning. And once people see good things happening, they want to sort of join in. And that's a way to make this thing happened. And I just wrote an article for Hometown News that'll be published next Friday, and I encourage you to read it because I've used a word that strikes fear into the hearts of many, and that word is taxes.
Oh, yeah.
And but we have to consider what we might have to do for the future might not be what we've done in the past. So, Bill, what else would you comment on? Like to comment on this, on the guardianship part? We're almost out of time.
Well, I think if you look at this case, there's so many interesting facets. One is the privacy aspect and how you can only really hear one side of the case, and there are some other guardianships. There was one locally that involved quite a local personality that the judge clamped down and told all the parties nobody was to talk to the press. Mm-hmm. So that can be done. The second thing is this whole DNR issue and having the public understand who can and cannot execute a DNR. The third level of inquiry is what can a professional do and not do? Mm-hmm. What are the standards of professional guardian's conduct? And then the last one is this 825 issue, which really could be used to hold the sword over anybody's head who signs a DNR. So it has a lot of different layers to it, and we'll be following it.
I have one quick question. Has our governor got a legal background?
I do not know the answer to that.
Well, whether he has a legal background or not, why or should, and I don't know if you can answer this on the air or not, should the governor be involved in changing a situation like this, or how much effect does the governor getting involved play either adversely or positively on this?
We have no idea until we see what they propose as legislation. Currently, there was a huge, big think tank group that was looking at guardianship. The Supreme Court of Florida was looking at the guardianship rules as well. The Real Property Probate Trust Laws section had come out with a total rewrite of the guardianship statute, but that got tabled and probably is now tabled even more in light of what's going on right now. And there is... So there are a lot of players in this. There's also the Florida State Guardianship Association.
Okay.
So a lot of players in this.
Bill, I want to thank you for what you've given us this morning. And if people want to, and thank you, Kerry, for participating.
Absolutely.
As much as we let you. But folks, it's extremely important that you understand what Bill is talking about. And I encourage you to go to helpingseniorsofbrevard.org and see about what we're talking about here, because it's important you understand this. And we hope to use this radio show and radio station as sort of a springboard to advocate for seniors here in Brevard County, and more needs to be done. And if you want to join in the fight, as I call it, call 473-7770 and tell Kim that you want to be a volunteer, you want to be involved with us. So, having said all that, thank you, Kerry, thank you, Bill, and thank you, listeners, for being with us today. And lastly, I would like to thank all of those of you that are privileged to wear the Purple Heart symbol on your license plate, or whether or not you have it on your license plate. You know in your own heart and your mind what you were willing to do to be awarded a Purple Heart. It is a significant and very, very meaningful award. I had a member of the family that had 3 Purple Hearts from... He was wounded 3 times in Korea. He was a helicopter pilot, later a retired Major General. And so there's a lot that could be said. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jim. Thank everybody. And be with us next week at 12 o'clock for the next edition of Helping Seniors. Bye-bye.